Well, first of all, the big news is Samantha Bee's on the show today. Very exciting to talk to her. And it kind of opened the can of a whole bunch of stuff that I'm perpetually, chronically interested in, and that is the way in which comedy is beginning to influence our perception of reality, the way comedy doesn't stay in its lane anymore, but goes into the realm of politics and other parts of the news. I'm completely absorbed by this, and it turns out I found somebody else who is too. We're going to talk to somebody from academia, Sophia McClennen, who is really taking a long, hard look at the way in which political comedy is changing not only itself, but the people who consume political comedy and the way we think about the news. All of that coming up right after this. Well, come to think of it, it's the news, right? The news is coming. Hi, today we're going to talk about political satire. We're going to do that a little bit later with a scholar who's written a new book about it, but we're also going to talk to a practitioner, a licensed practitioner. Do not get your political satire from someone who is not a licensed, accredited practitioner. No one could be more so than Samantha Bee, comedian and host of the podcast Choice Words with Samantha Bee, has a new newsletter out, which we will also talk about. Former host of Full Frontal with Samantha Bee. Before that, of course, a beloved correspondent on The Daily Show. I don't know. Have I left anything out? Do you do
you did it.
interior
interior
decorating? Do you have a line of cupcakes or sheets or towels? I need to anything.
Listen, towel charms. I'm all in.
You've got to vertically integrate in this environment.
You really do. You have to be a master of all things.
So let's talk a little bit about what is happening right now. So first of all, I'll talk a little bit about this tour. It's called Your Favorite Woman. What are we dealing with besides Our Favorite Woman?
Well, when Full Frontal ended, I had to think long and hard about what it was that I wanted to carry forward from that experience of diving into like such interesting and compelling subject matter. What did I want from that skill set and from that experience to bring forward into my new life? And one of the things that was so important to me on the show was talking about really women's issues and, whatever it is being a woman means to you, women's issues are at the forefront of my brain at all times. We ended the show the day after or the day before Roe fell. These are ideas and this is subject matter that is of great personal interest to me. And so I wanted to do a live show. I was ready to take it on the road, ready to do a live version of what it is that I do in that really familiar cadence. And so I've been doing a show about how little we know about our bodies, the inferior sex education all of us have received, and what that means for us as we age, as we move through our lives, like the shame and the stigma that we live with, the fact that I entered perimenopause and was like, am I the only person this has ever happened to? Because nobody was really talking about it at all. So everything that happened in my body was just such a mystery to me. And so I thought, well, let's make that funny and put it up on a stage.
I had a friend who went to a Catholic boys' school, and the sex education was taught by the gym teacher. And he apparently said something at the beginning where he said, "Gentlemen, the sperm, so the egg is, gentlemen, it's like a pinball machine," and that was,
Oh, yeah, like a pinball machine.
It's all you need to know, really.
That's all you need to know. As my own personal gynecologist says to me, they really just teach you enough about STIs so that you know that if you get one, you should be really ashamed of yourself.
All right. So we should also talk briefly about the new newsletter, which is called Plan B. Your name is so available to do things with. It's almost unfair.
It really is. It is unfair. I'm sorry. I was just explaining to someone because they were so certain that I had changed my name from something much longer and more difficult to spell. But I'm like, no, back in the olden days, like I have documents from the 1800s with the name B on them. So clearly somewhere back in the lore of my family, someone was just a lowly beekeeper.
Yeah.
And they were just like, you don't even have a name. We're just going to call you Mr. B.
We're not even calling you Mr. Beekeeper, which would have given a little bit more dignity
not
to
at
it.
all. They're like, we can't be bothered giving you a full name. So make up your first name and we're just Mr. B. Doss.
I just had assumed it was Beelzebub and they shortened it at Rikers Island, but what do I know?
Yeah, I mean, it could, well, I'll never tell.
Yeah, exactly. That would be a good thing not to tell. So, but, the newsletter is interesting too, because I think you would grant that although you are very, very genuine on stage or when you're doing full frontal or whatever, there's a persona that you're doing too. You're not just yourself. It seems like the newsletter, we are starting to read about creepy salads you eat in airports and stuff like that. There's this kind of
oh my God, you read it.
Yeah, and I should say every single issue of the newsletter is a different creepy salad eaten in an airport. So and it never gets repetitious either.
No.
But you know what I'm saying? It's a little bit of letting people in a little closer to maybe who you really are. I don't know whether that spooks you or not.
I think that's true. And I think it's by design. I mean, there's no kind of moved through life. I've amassed or accumulated a lot of people who are like fans theoretically. And so I feel that it's just, there's nothing much left for me to say except the things I'm compelled to say. And so, part of that is letting people know what I'm up to. Like, when you do a podcast or you're doing a radio show or you're doing a live show, you have to literally let people know that it exists so that they can find it. And so if you can reach people where they live, it's just a way to kind of pull everything together, all the things that I'm doing, and just blast it out and say, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm interested in right now. There's going to be lots of stuff coming up in the next year or so. And so it's just a way to find everything. Everything is so, we're just all over the place all the time and yet not on television. And that's okay.
Yeah, and I think people also want to know or are gratified to know, because you see people on television, you see people in starring roles or on stage or whatever, and it looks pretty great, and you think that must be a very stress-free existence. Just so to know that you have to get from Iowa City to Madison, Wisconsin, or it's maybe the other way around.
It's a pretty normal life. I mean, we're filming a Zoom right now as I'm speaking to you. I can see my background. It looks really neat and tidy. It's not gorgeous, but it is neat and tidy. But I have to assure you that 6 inches to the right of me is a pile of debris so deep. And I have put it all over there so that you can't see it. And that one of my jobs tonight is sorting through like electrical wires that are just like nests of wires and old teddy bears that I just have to figure out what to do with because I literally can't take it anymore.
You're basically saying that you're electrocuting teddy bears, and I don't know that if
100%.
you want that to get out.
Well,
and
you know what my last name is.
Yeah, true.
Really.
I just saw an EPA guy in a hazmat suit walk past you on the Zoom, so you've got a problem there. There's no question about it.
Pretty much.
So I'd like to talk a little bit too about, well, since we are talking about political satire for the whole time today, 2016 was when Full Frontal went on the air, but it was like February of 2016.
It was.
And I'm assuming that you had no idea what kind of comment was rushing towards you news-wise.
Of course. How in the world? I mean, we all thought it was hilarious. We all played it for laughs. Trump coming down the escalator, the rude things that he would say, the terrible things that he started saying right off the bat, like right at the bottom of the escalator. He told us who he was, and people voted for him anyway. So no, I don't think that any of us ever really took it seriously. Everybody reminds me that I traveled a lot the summer before the 2016 election, just talking to people out in Pennsylvania and all over the states. And I came back from that trip, traveling around, talking to regular people. I came back from that trip and I said, Trump is going to win the election. He's going to win because nobody out there is going to vote for him. I think he's going to win. And then I forgot that I said that. So I did, on some level, part of me knew that it was going to happen. And then I conveniently forgot and made no plan for him to win. And the night of our show on election night was horrifying.
Well, tell me if I have this right, because this sort of popped up for me during my exhaustive research for this conversation, which was, it looked like maybe you had recorded a kind of high five video for the day after the election in 2016, where you're, including your former boss, Jon Stewart, high fives you, and then like actually he's just pulled a muscle and he has to go sit down. But and you couldn't use it. In other words, you kind of assumed it was going to be high five day.
I assumed that it was going to be high five day, and it wasn't even high five day. Like, look, the amazing miracle that we have done. It was more high five. It's over. Like the election season is over. Now we can live again. Because that was a grueling election season. And I think that I was just looking forward to getting back to life, like actually making laws and changing policy and like actually governing seemed so exciting.
You're such a dreamer.
Such a dreamer. How whimsical to imagine a government that governs. Yeah. And so we had to film the next morning, very early in the morning, for that night's after the day after the election show to sort of undercut it.
But if I understand it, one reason you probably shouldn't throw out too many smoking teddy bears or whatever it is you've got, because you hung on to that and then you got to use it 4 years later, right? The high five video?
Oh yeah, we used it. We did use it the day after the election, but we filmed an extra piece of it that was me waking up from my beautiful dream to understand that we were living in a nightmare. And then we used it again. I think we used little pieces of it, or we broke it up a little bit.
So, I mean, I can't really use the phrase "the good thing about the Trump presidency" because that doesn't really work. Sure. But in a sense, the good thing about the Trump presidency might be if you were sitting around being Samantha Bee wondering, what is my purpose in life? The answer was right in front of you. Kat, we're going to play A1 right here.
As we all know, restricting abortion, which is a safe and legal medical procedure, is one of Trump's favorite hobbies, along with handshake assaults, recreational swelling, and staring at the sun. But Trump doesn't believe any of that shit. He's basically an advertisement for birth control. Well, I mean, I guess these homunculi technically are, but Trump is the spokesman. If Trump hasn't paid for at least a half dozen abortions, I will eat this blazer. Actually, I take that back. That was wildly unfair. If Trump hasn't promised to pay for at least a half dozen abortions, then not paid for them, then written bad checks for them, ghosted the woman, then declared bankruptcy, and eventually made Russia pay for them, I will eat this blazer.
Those are good jokes.
Yes. We should say
the
homunculi, which you didn't get to see because this is radio, were Eric and Don Jr. You probably connected those dots.
I mean, I guessed. Yeah.
No, I was saying to the listeners, but our listeners are very sharp. They might have figured that out. So,
I mean, after that, I had a lot of people contact me and say, really? You think only a half dozen? I was thinking, people were like, I was thinking 42. And then I was like, my actual number was 13. But half dozen sounds good for TV.
This is why he has so much trouble getting a lawyer now, is because he didn't pay for any of the abortions.
That's right.
So never let that get around about you. I wonder also, you had a lot of time during Full Frontal to think about what you were doing maybe that journalism wasn't doing. And I don't know, is there a way in which political satire in the way that you've done it is necessary partly because traditional journalism doesn't really do certain things that maybe it should do?
Well, I mean, I think that when political satire, when John was really, really chugging at The Daily Show, it was people really weren't doing the kinds of things that John was. People really weren't playing tape, producing evidence that a political leader had said the opposite thing 10 times. And him just kind of producing the tape and the proof was kind of not revolutionary, but it was uncommon. Now people are able to do it. Now it's something that everybody does, and it doesn't really impact anything, but at least we have that. At least we have that. And the one thing that we did have at Full Frontal was the ability to say anything we wanted, the ability to process things in any way we desired, the ability to call something racist in no uncertain terms, in ways that it is very difficult to do, or shouldn't be as difficult as it is, but because journalists are held to standards that we were not held to, or their hands were tied because part of their job relies on having access to politicians and having access to the White House. And if you cross them or if you push them too hard, you can be cast out of the press rooms. Your credentials can be taken away. You can be denied access. So there is a relationship between journalism and our political leaders that feeds they feed each other. There's a symbiosis there. That's the way it is.
Yeah, but as you say that, I also think you're also describing a devil's bargain too. You're saying, well, journalists have to, you have to do certain things to get access. And I think that both you and Jon Stewart have kind of exploded that a little bit. I mean, a little bit. He was very, very revolutionary in just saying about CNN. This isn't telling you the actionable story. This isn't a good way to give people information. I mean, I think the fact that you guys are willing to go after people like me is really, really helpful because we do get very complacent about it.
We're not coming for you, Colin. Nobody's coming for you.
Are you sure?
Unimpeachable.
Because there's a man standing right outside my studio, and I don't know who he is.
I do think that there is a role to play for satire, and that is saying the things, in a way, saying the quiet part out loud, the part that no one can say because we're just not beholden to anybody, or we weren't, and those things shift around a lot. But at the time, no one was going to let us in the White House anyway, so it really didn't matter. We could say anything we wanted to about anything that we wanted to. And then when I started doing my own show, I reached out to so many political leaders, like so many, and they all said no. I think because they realized that I would literally ask them anything. Mm-hmm. And I would ask them what was on my mind. I would say what was on my mind to them. And it was an impossible situation. They just could not allow that to happen. And then I very quickly realized that I could still say whatever I wanted. I did not actually need to be talking to them. And in some cases, it's worse to talk to them because they just talk in circles and say the same thing over and over again from a pre-prepared piece of paper.
Also, you didn't have to watch their little faces fall when you said something mean.
There's a freedom in it that is that can be a refreshing point of view.
I think another part of this, so we're talking to Sophia McClennen a little bit later in the show, and in her book, there is a chapter on Samantha Bee.
There is?
The whole Samantha Bee. You're telling me you haven't gotten the galleys already?
No, I have not. Oh, boy.
Yes. There's also, I'm writing a book, there's also going to be a Samantha Bee chapter, but it's very different, yeah. Okay. But one of the words that she uses, she talks about how you fused political satire and humor with outrage. And I think that's a very interesting description, and I think it's a pretty accurate one. There's a way in which you let your outrage kind of hang out a little bit. And I don't know whether that's a conscious decision or something you just couldn't help doing, but I'm wondering what you think about it.
Well, it's certainly very organic, for sure. I think it was just, you reach a certain age in life and then you're like, well, do I really have to pretend anymore, or can I just be as mad as I want to be? And then we'll just see how long this television show lasts. And that was more the approach that I took was, let's just say everything we want to say out loud all the time and let the chips fall. And it was effective. I'm glad that I walked away from that experience feeling very clean. I said the things that I wanted to say. What is really sad to me is the contraction that is happening in our entertainment industry right now. And I do mean a contraction. There are so many opportunities being lost. Much of the business is being run now by real, kind of accountants who are only looking at the numbers, really being pleasing to shareholders in a way that I think is really counterintuitive to art and content and creativity. You're seeing now that there's so much content in these libraries that is being erased off of every and all systems. So there are just reams and classics and television shows that you simply cannot access anymore because we're being denied access to those artistic products because they're owned by a giant company, a big conglomerate that wiped the library clean because they don't want to pay residuals and they don't want to be bothered with the legalese of airing an episode of The Detour, which is a show that I made. It has been erased. It doesn't exist anymore. You can't watch it. There's nowhere to see it because it is owned and it is gone for good.
Well, speak for yourself. I have it on hard drive, but
well, I appreciate that. But there's so much content. Like the Netflix library went from this massive body of available titles to like 9,000 titles in total. So it's really scary. It's really scary, but it does represent like there's a narrowing point of view, and it's happening. It's happening before our eyes. We're being led to believe that we have access to all of this incredible content, but the actual library is getting smaller and smaller, and we don't even know it.
Right. It's weird that you're saying all this because I had a conversation with Richard Brody from the New Yorker about exactly this. I mean,
really?
It's why he owns, at least how he explains to other people why he has so many shelves in his apartment, I think, and why there's just hard copies of all kinds of movies that he cares about, because he just doesn't trust anybody to take care of them. And he really now believes it almost is the consumer's duty to take care of some of this stuff for the reasons that you're saying, because there isn't.
I agree. Yeah. I completely agree with that perspective. It's just all of this stuff is going to be lost. It is going to be lost. And I think it's a real warning. These gigantic multinational companies really do not care. They don't care if we love their content. They don't care if they're expressing a point of view. They care that people think that they are. They care that people think that they're expressing points of view, but actually contraction is the name of the game. I think it's really scary. And I think, I'm not like a conspiracy person. This is actually happening.
Right. And the great thing about it is that they always say that they do care, which is how you can tell that they don't care. Sure. It's like, I love old movies. Turn to classic movies. No, I think I'm going to cut the staff.
I'm going to cut the staff, and then we're going to reduce the library by 75%. Because it would be so weird if we had to pay Richard Dreyfuss a residual of 25 cents.
I do.
I pay him every day.
Yeah, I mean, I
cut him a check for 25 cents every day of my life.
Yeah, it just comes right out of my credit card. I don't even notice it. It's well, would you go back to late night? I mean, is that an attractive idea if somebody made you the right kind of offer, or was 7 years or whatever was that enough?
I don't know that I would go back to anything in the same way that I did it before. So I'm not sure it's on offer or in anyone's mind, and I'm okay with that if it's not. And it hasn't really kind of come up for me. I'm enjoying absorbing our terrible news cycle as a civilian versus someone who has to make comedy with it. I will say that it's calming. I'm still mad all the time about the news cycle.
So we're almost done here. But maybe not back to late night television. How about Marvel Cinematic Universe? Because you're a bee, there's an Ant-Man. I mean, how hard is this? I can't even believe your agent hasn't gotten you this already, because it's just tailor-made.
I know how to fly. Also, Colin, you don't know that about me.
I have never seen you do that.
Well, that's how I exit every interview.
Yeah. Okay. Samantha Bee, so great to talk to you. Comedian, host of the podcast Choice Words with Samantha Bee, former host of Full Frontal with Samantha Bee, and of course the Samantha Bee line of towels and pillowcases, which you can get at JCPenney.
I'm passionate about towel charms.
All right. Thanks for doing this today.
Thank you so much.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk to, as promised, a scholar who studies people like Samantha Bee and the people who consume political satire.
When a bee lies sleeping in the palm of your hand, you're bewitched and deep in love's long looked after land, where you see a sun-up sky with a morning new, and where the days go laughing by as love comes a-calling on you.
So Samantha Bee is one of the points of many spears that have emerged really over the last few decades. There's a way in which political comedy has altered itself. It used to be there's something that was done in comedy clubs with people like Mort Sahl or George Carlin. Then it turned into also late night one-liners, right? Everything was based on a very simple premise. Bill Clinton ate too much fast food. Bill Clinton was horny. George W. Bush was dumb. These were one-liners. They were not extended analyses of anybody's political positions. But what has emerged, obviously, is a cohort of late-night comics and related performers who really look hard at political questions, at questions in the news, and even maybe create a kind of news literacy for some of their viewers. And one of the people watching that whole process unfold is Sophia McClennen, professor of international affairs and comparative literature at Penn State University, author of numerous books, including Trump Was a Joke, How Satire Made Sense of a President Who Didn't, and Is Satire Saving Our Nation? So, first of all, Sophia McClennen, welcome to our conversation.
Well, thanks for having me.
Maybe we should just begin with the fact that there now have been attempts to quantify the effect of people watching political comedy that really engages with the news and maybe even informs viewers about things they didn't know about, probably especially the cohort of younger viewers. There have been attempts to sort of look at what does that mean? To what degree is political engagement increasing or decreasing? Does it inculcate a kind of cynical view of news that makes people less likely to vote? What do we know? Just maybe run through just some of the sensibilities that scholars are developing about this topic.
Well, I think the thing we want to start with is a sense of wonder that scholars are even studying this at all.
True.
Because, of course, as a lifelong nerd, we like to study everything, but it is worth noting that there really is a substantial body of research now in fields like communications, political science, and the humanities, and anthropology, and psychology, and neuroscience, of a whole significant body of work that studies the social effects of satire. And this isn't just because suddenly we all wanted to study something funny. It's because satire itself has started to form a public function and started to shape citizen behavior in ways we've never seen before. So that's the first thing is, wow. And it isn't just the nerds. Lots of polling, for example. You might recall that shortly after Walter Cronkite died, folks were asking, who is your most trusted journalist? And Jon Stewart won. And this wasn't, again, sort of academics driving this. This was just a public opinion survey. So we are responding to a sea change. And what we're seeing is a number of things that are really counterintuitive, because you think satire can't really be good. It seems to foster cynicism. Satire can't be good. It's making jokes. But what we find in general is a series of positive things: that people who consume satire are more politically engaged, they're more politically confident, they participate in civic society in a far more robust way. They have higher nuance and critical thinking, a number of positive traits. There are, of course, some flaws, though. So the flaws that are really fascinating have to do with the ways in which satire increases the boundaries between communities. So let's say I make a satirical joke to you, you laugh, we share this heightened sense of community. That we know is a benefit. But the bad news is I may have made someone else's candidate look bad. And when I do that, it isn't just the joke, let's say hypothetically, about Trump. It's the way it affects his supporters, who then might find themselves even more vigorously attached to defending him. So generally, satire is what we call boundary heightening humor, and it will increase those boundaries across society. So if you're worried about political polarization, which is a good thing to worry about, we would say satire is contributing to that at some level.
Yeah, I think one really interesting person in that context is Jordan Klepper. His gig, basically, is to go to Trump rallies, gun rallies, kind of gun ownership rallies, stuff like that. He kind of has the look, anyway, of a person who might naturally turn up at one of those events. So unless you know who Jordan Klepper is and you're at a Trump rally, you don't know that he's making fun of you. I was looking for a Jordan Klepper clip to play today, and I realized so much of it is visual. It's talking to these 2 or 3 people at a Trump rally who are in these garish, outlandish costumes, and people say, this is a cult. What do you think? And they go, we're not a cult. And the laugh is how they look. But that would be the kind of thing where if you were that person and you watched later and you tuned into the fact that everything that seemed to be happening on a pretty sincere basis was, in fact, done to expose you as a ludicrous freak, that would do nothing to knit together the severed bonds of civil society, right?
Yeah, Jordan Klepper is a perfect example, really, because what Jordan Klepper's field pieces do is generally point out hypocrisy, sometimes just make, certain far right supporters seem stupid. Those are easy to do in part because those pieces get edited. It's important for everyone to know that, so that occasionally, we may be missing something that somebody had said that would have made them look better. This is a fairly old, long-standing comedy routine. But the hypocrisy that Jordan points out when he does those pieces is extremely valuable, because these are reframing stories that help all the rest of us who like Jordan Klepper understand why we get frustrated when we hear some of these types of positions. The issue that's interesting, like you said, is that those people he's interviewing and their allies, right, whoever kind of feels like they're in that group, will get outraged. The critical thing to think about, though, is that group is sort of always outraged anyway, and they tend to get worked up. If you watch, say, Jesse Waters on Fox News, or Greg Gutfeld, or Sean Hannity, they're already whipping up that audience to think that everyone hates them or disrespects them. So it's not entirely clear whether Jordan Klepper's tipping the scale a lot. So that would be the one thing to think about.
Yeah, I think there's another thing to think about, which is that Klepper, and not to harp on him, we'll move on to other people, but Klepper has probably spent more airtime talking to Trump supporters, talking to the kinds of people who go to really extreme gun rights shows where there's 11 acres of guns, as he said in one of his pieces, and then anybody at CNN or MSNBC or NBC, ABC, CBS. In other words, one of the things a lot of people said after 2016 is if you really went to the rallies, if you really talked to people, you would realize that you were underestimating and kind of misconstruing the nature of Trump support. Klepper really, there's just, I don't know how much airtime it all adds up to, but it's hours and hours of field pieces. Yes, heavily edited field pieces. But in terms of a representation of what's really going on, you could argue that this is a kind of picture of reality that straight news isn't as good at giving you.
That's absolutely true. In fact, that is the beauty of what Jordan's doing, because it isn't just that he's covering the issue. He's doing it ironically. And so one of the things that I really try to highlight in my book, Trump Was a Joke, is the concept that when the world itself is functioning ironically, what the nerds would call situational irony, when, say, the least qualified person wins a job that demands the most qualifications, that's when the world itself is being ironic. It doesn't make sense. So when Jordan is able to use irony to point out the hypocrisy, it's simply far more effective than, say, if Jake Tapper said, oh, wow, the pro-gun arguments don't make sense.
So there's also a quality of this kind of comedy that seeps into reality. I think you used a term called laughtivism. This is kind of the idea that the average person now, when expressing him or herself, might choose a more comic way of doing it at a protest or a rally because they've been so saturated with this kind of comedy.
Right. So one of the things that is, again, if you thought it was a bad idea for voters to watch satire news, you're going to really think it's a bad idea if protest and political activism is now got this element of humor. It just seems to go against your gut instincts. Our research shows that laughtivism, that is incorporating a satirical, ironic element to activism, isn't just on the rise, it's more effective. We have data that literally shows it makes your group more likely to have success. One of the groups that I've talked to, and that's a particularly good example of this, is the group Indivisible, that was started by some people who had worked with Obama after the Trump election. And what they found was that, sure, you could go and demand accountability, let's say, of your local representative, or you could host a town meeting where your representative didn't show up and put an empty suit there. Or in one case, they had a chicken they put on the podium to show that representatives weren't representing their constituencies. And then you get this great media coverage and you suddenly totally reframe your activist intentions. And you add this element of humor that really drives home the point you're trying to make.
I think another thing that's happening that goes with this, too, is entities that are not strictly comic, are more maybe sort of documentary in nature, but taking the approach that's been used by John Oliver, by Daily Show field pieces to a certain degree, by Seth Meyers. And I'm thinking of things like This Place Rules or The Circus or some of Alexandra Pelosi's stuff. I think some of these filmmakers who might have come out of a semi-news background, or at least are not making strictly comic pieces, look at the stuff from The Daily Show and look at maybe some of the John Oliver stuff now and think, wow, that's a really good way to tell a story. You just point at somebody being an idiot, you let them be an idiot, and you let that kind of speak for itself, and you get away from these staged opportunities, press conferences, photo ops, stuff like that, and you just go to where people are talking a little bit more loosely. I feel as though comedy has made certain kinds of news documentary stuff more comic, whether it ever planned to be or not. Does this make any sense to you?
It does make sense. And there's, again, a number of factors that contribute to this, part of which is that the traditional news media has gotten somewhat unserious as well and has more scandal hype. When you're watching CNN and it's like breaking, every 10 seconds, there's some sort of, another calamity to call our attention. Once you see that the news itself has gotten away from that Walter Cronkite, more neutral, flat way of giving information, it's not surprising that satire is sort of the foil for that. It also has an unserious nature to it, but it's one which is consistently attempting to draw your attention to the issues. So that is one of the pieces. The other piece that's the part that I'm really enjoying working on is what this does to you cognitively, which is to say, if I process and if I present news to you in a way which has this element of mirth, has this element of creative comedy, you will pay better attention to me. And because you're going to pay better attention, you're going to have better information recall. This is the great thing. Somebody watches John Oliver, they will remember what they learned from John Oliver much more than if Wolf Blitzer tells them. This we know for a fact. So this is the other side of it that we see, which is just it's effective in communicating messages to the public in ways that they will remember.
Right. And I think part of that also is the emotive quality to it. Not just the fact that laughing and finding something funny is an emotional experience, but if you watch John Oliver, or I mean, really the extreme version of this it would be Jon Stewart, where he would just freak out and start screaming about something in a way that nobody could possibly do on CNN. Anderson Cooper can start screaming, and Rachel Maddow can start screaming, not that way. But there's that visceral quality that I think is kicking different tripwires in our neural structure. And that's specifically going to imprint and burn itself in and be more memorable.
Well, you're absolutely right. So this is what the neuroscientists call arousal. So the part of the brain, right, where you're getting that intense affect is related to arousal. And when you couple that with high order critical thinking, you're going to sear it into your memory better. That's sort of that story. So you're absolutely right. It's why most of us can remember some goofy middle school teacher who had these silly songs they'd dance around and use to make us remember math rules. But we do remember them. And so we know that there is something about, again, that affect. Once you have high affect coupled with information, it's highly effective for memory recall.
We're going to grab a quick break here. This is fascinating stuff. We're going to come back with more of Sophia McClennen after this.
I don't want to be funny anymore. I don't want to be funny anymore. Lately I've been feeling like the odd man now.
Follow The Colin McEnroe Show on Facebook or Twitter at Colin McShow. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to or following our podcast on any podcast app. It's free. You don't have to wait an hour after eating before you go swimming. That's just something our mothers believed. Back to the show.
And special thanks today to Kat Pastor. That was her voice that you heard here. She's our technical producer. Lily Tyson is also producing this particular episode. All right, so we're with Sophia McClennen, a professor of international affairs and comparative literature at Penn State University, author of numerous books, including Trump Was a Joke, How Satire Made Sense of a President Who Didn't, and Is Satire Saving Our Nation? So, Sophia, let's talk a little bit about how the form of comedy itself is changing. This is something that really fascinates me, right? John Oliver will do a 20-minute piece, on sort of sometimes a pretty obscure public policy point, Medicaid coverage gaps, the Canadian federal election, the North Dakota oil boom. I'm reading some of his topics from 2015. This is even pre-Trump. And similarly, Seth Meyers, he'll do the Closer Look segment. Those run 13 to 16 minutes. He did 3 of them in a row about the Fox Dominion case. So there's like 48 minutes of comedy coverage of the Fox Dominion case on consecutive nights. And even Trevor Noah, a little slightly more constrained time thing, wasn't unusual for him to go 8 minutes about like the Middle East. And some of the strategy, Sophia, seems to be adding enough jokes to a pretty serious topic so that you hold people's attention.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a number of things you're seeing there that, again, are really head scratchers, which is these are professional entertainers. They came into this wanting to entertain. They started off, as the class clown. These were not people who started off as political journalists. So the fact that they suddenly have this sense of mission, let's say, is interesting. So that would be one thing to note as a real sea change in what we're seeing in terms of the satire landscape, a sense of civic duty. The other piece, like you said, is how is it that you can take what should ostensibly be, people think, a comedy show and put all this serious information in? And again, one of the things you want to look at here is the fact that for many people, this is now their number one intro into some of these critical ideas. If you're like me, I just turned 58, you grew up watching things like David Letterman or something like that, where if you were going to mention a current event, it was assuming you had already read the paper or watched the nightly news. It wasn't his job to inform you of all the details. These days, the political comedians are often your entry point into an issue. So John Oliver, as you mentioned, he has a huge team of researchers. They take very seriously that they're going to give accurate information to the public. So these shows, the sort of, entire way they are designed is quite different. Hassan Minhaj, when he had his show, The Patriot Act, they were really very much dedicated to covering an important topic, but doing it with comedy. And so that right there, again, is a really significant difference. But what we find is that it's highly effective and people really like it and they learn a lot. And as you pointed out, John Oliver is able to educate his audience on issues they wouldn't have known anything about or even necessarily sort of found themselves drawn to. And so the nerdy way of describing this is issue priming. You get people interested in an issue through the comedy, because if I said to you, I'm going to show you a 20-minute YouTube video on how awful, say, assisted living places are, you'd say, no, I'm not doing that. But if John Oliver does it, you learn something because you know that he'll do it in a way that gives you, again, that element of pleasure.
I think there are some real questions about how much they're going to be allowed to do. There's a little bit of a shut up and dribble version of this in comedy. Most of them kind of break comic character. Trevor Noah started doing this thing where he would just talk to the audience during resets and not necessarily be funny, but just be very real. And it's a risk for a comedian, right? A comedian makes his or her living in his or her bones on what they can do in the world of funny. And there's some people who might say, you know what, I don't want to hear you be serious. That's not what you're not interesting to me in that way. Can you say a little bit of your thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, I like to remind people that Ben Franklin was pretty funny.
I saw a couple of his comedy sets in Vegas, and he was extremely funny. I can confirm that.
This country has an extremely long tradition of very serious leaders also moving into the realm of satire to make their point. So that would be one good example. But Samuel Clemens also testified before Congress. So this isn't as though this is a brand new thing. But you're absolutely right. It is new in its extent. So what I think is fascinating is that sort of anxiety. Well, oh no, the comedians are not being funny anymore because they're so busy being political. We've seen sort of articles about this coming out. I'm tired of these shows. They're not funny. Well, the reality is there's plenty of audience for them. There are people out there that like what we call effortful thinking. They want comedy that's smart, and they want comedy that helps educate them. And they like the fact that the comedians are sincere. They're not just making a joke because they can. And so we have this society today where people are saying, I actually prefer a comedian who is serious about playing a positive role in society. And you can see this not just in the space of comedy, but in celebrities overall, right? What is Matt Damon doing? He did a really funny piece for the water organization where he says he's not going to use a toilet until this entire community has clean drinking water, these kinds of bits. George Clooney, etc. You have a number of celebrities now so-called crossing the line. So I think we need to just get used to the fact that folks are recognizing that they can't be quiet over major political issues, whether it's the environment or the strength of our democracy. So I think you're right that people worry over it. But the reality is this shift has taken place and there's nothing that's going to stop it.
Sophia McClennen, we're going to have to stop here, but just for time reasons, but I hope you will come back. I believe there's another big election coming up, so it might be fun. And as you can tell, this is an area of great interest to me, too. So Sophia McClennen, professor of international affairs and comparative literature at Penn State, author of numerous books, including Trump Was a Joke, How Satire Made Sense of a President Who Didn't, and Is Satire Saving Our Nation? Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Thank you for having me.
I see you on the radio. Oh yeah, I see you on the radio. Oh Lord, down on Colin McEnroe. That's right. I see you on the radio. Let me tell you, baby, I'll meet you down on a sidewalk. past the conservatory, up the street from the seminary. You know, it's a very, very, very cool place to hang out. Yeah. It's cozy, like a Cracker Barrel. Yeah, we all be laughing, talking, joking, talking about this and talking about that, and talk about everything as a matter of fact. Oh yeah, talk about Torrington, Vernon, Danbury, Waterbury, Alderberry, Woodbury, hitting on New Britain, Vernon, I already said that one, Avon, Farmington, yeah, 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 yeah.